This is no box of Cracker Jack. Find out about the surprise inside next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here once again with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. As always, for more information, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. That's where you'll find out what we're doing here, what's going on, articles, podcasts, events, all sorts of fun and games. You can obviously follow me on YouTube, Facebook, and a bunch of other places. Here's what I'm going to ask for you. If you have a question you would like me to answer, or if there's some article you saw in the news you want me to do some research on, please post it in the comments below. Let me know. I'll take a look, and who knows, it may turn into a nice episode of the Constitution Study. So, what do we have in store for you today? Today we have USMCA and the surprise inside. I'm old enough to remember, when I was a kid, you'd open a box of cereal and there was usually a toy surprise inside, and it was frequently quite disappointing. It was some cheap piece of plastic that usually broke within about 5 minutes of actually opening the box. So, that surprise was rather, he said it was disappointing, but, after you opened those boxes and dug through the cereal a few times, you kind of expected that whatever toy, no matter how pretty it looked on the front of the box, was going to be kind of cheap and cheesy and not last very long. Sadly, as I've grown older, I see surprises much less as enticements to purchase, more like Trojan horses, the one we're going to talk about today. We're all familiar with the story of the Trojan horse. You take something nice and pretty, you put something nasty inside and hope they take it in and get a rather nasty surprise. Well, this particular surprise, if we bring this into our nation, I think it'll do a lot of long-term damage to the republic. I'm referring to a letter I found from several members of Congress to President Trump concerned about language included in the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, otherwise known as USMCA or NAFTA 2.0 or whatever you wish to call it. This particular treaty has some interesting language. In the letter, we read, we are, however, deeply concerned by the unprecedented inclusion in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, of sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI language, for the first time in a free trade agreement. This language is housed in Article 23.9 and Article 23.12, 5L1. So what is this language and why is the SOGI language in there? And there's actually a whole lot that can be discussed and debated from a political standpoint. Looking at it from a constitutional standpoint, why do we care? Well, this is a treaty. And it's actually a really good example of the misunderstandings and the misuse of the treaty clause. You see, basically, this type of SOGI language, this language that places a person's perceived gender and similar above the rights of other Americans, has been proposed in Congress at least 2 or 3 times, if not more, and it's been rejected by Congress at least 2 or 3 times, if not more. Meaning, the representatives of the people and the representatives of the states have looked at this language and said, no, it doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong in federal law. However, you see, there's this clause called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution that says that treaties that are made pursuant to let's show you. The constitutions and the laws of the United States, which shall be made under the authority, which in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. That's Article 6, Clause 2. Again, this language is often misrepresented. The supreme law of the land is the Constitution. Federal law is made pursuant, meaning following the Constitution, are also considered supreme over state and local laws, and treaties which are made under the authority of the United States are supreme. So if we ratify this treaty, then this language becomes not only part of our law, it supersedes state laws. It means if you have a state that doesn't wish to enact SOGI laws, tough. It's a treaty. Now there's questions about, can a treaty supersede the Constitution? Technically, no, but we spend so little time paying attention to what the Constitution actually says. If this treaty gets signed, judges will say, well, it's a treaty, it's been ratified, therefore it's supreme law. So I'm sorry, states which do not have SOGI laws, you have to have SOGI laws now. In other words, we are turning over some of our lawmaking capability to international agreements, international bodies. Now, why do I say this is often a misunderstanding or a misrepresentation of treaties and how they're created? So we've all been told that the president the executive branch negotiates a treaty. He sends his Secretary of State or whoever, they negotiate a treaty, and then they take that language and send it to the Senate for ratification. If the Senate ratifies it, well, then it becomes an enacted treaty. But look at what the Constitution says. Look at it right there. Boy, I'm looking at the wrong way. It's backwards for me. So he says the president shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties. See, here's the part we keep missing. Where's the advice of the Senate in the process I just described? I mean, was the Senate involved in the negotiation of this treaty? Did they preview the language and advise the president and the executive branch what would and would not be acceptable? What they might and might not want in there? What would they would and would not be willing to ratify? See, that's the part that keeps getting lost. We've been told that this is a bifurcated process. The president does part and then the Senate does part, but that's not what the Constitution says. The president is supposed to do this with the advice and consent of the Senate, not just the consent of the Senate. Now, if the Senate is involved, which I don't think they were, but if they were involved, they might have looked at this and said, yeah, you know what, we tried SOGI language and it didn't pass. We won't ratify this with SOGI language. More importantly, the states and the people would have been warned about this. They could have seen this because their representatives would be involved in the negotiations, and we could have given our input. See, since the senators are chosen by election of the people rather than the state legislatures now, then they have a duty to come and say, hey, here's this treaty we're looking at, and we're your representatives in the state for the states. What do you think? But you see, that's not how it's worked. I find a couple things interesting. One is the letter the congressmen sent. They're all members of the House of Representatives. They all sent a letter to the president. Where's the letter to the Senate? See, the Senate still has to ratify this. The Senate should be involved in the advising of the negotiations. But again, we have so lost our understanding of the Constitution. Not only do the people not understand it, but those in Congress who swear an oath to support it either don't know it, don't understand it, or just don't care. Now, what I really find dangerous about this is, again, you're talking about taking U.S. law, our rights, and placing them under an authority outside of the U.S. And actually, let me do this. Let me show you this. So in the USMCA, here's the language. There's several bits and pieces, but I kind of boil it down to this. This is a quote from, I believe it's, this is 23.12.1. The parties recognize the importance of cooperation as a mechanism for effective implementation of this chapter to enhance opportunities to improve labor standards and to further advance common commitments regarding labor matters, including the principles and rights stated in the ILO Declaration on Rights at Work. Okay. See, part of this says we're going to commit. We're going to advance these common ideas as stated into the international, I had a second, International Labor Organization Declaration on Rights at Work. This is an international organization that sets up standards and expects its members to adopt. Now, I believe the United States of America, has signed on to certain parts. There's lots of little bits and pieces and declarations, and like a lot of these, it's really kind of confusing. But I believe we've adopted some of those. But as I looked, there are several articles, several documents to that we have not adopted. We have not signed on. We have not ratified. So here we have language that says, hey, guess what? We're going to commit to advance our common commitments under ILO Declaration of Rights. So if we start committing to the ILO to define labor rights in the U.S., what happens when said ILO changes them? What happens when the ILO decides that religious exemptions are no longer allowed? Remember Little Sisters of the Poor? Remember Hobby Lobby, where the Supreme Court said, listen, you're a religious organization or you're a closely held company with religious beliefs. You are therefore exempt from certain standards under the Affordable Care Act. What happens when the ILO says, no, you can't use religion as an exemption anymore? What if the ILO decides that freedom of speech or even the freedom to determine how unions are formed and what rights companies have and unions have, what if they change? If this treaty is a law of the land and we've committed to adopting those, does that mean we have to adopt those as well? See, this is why many of our founders, including George Washington, were so concerned about us getting involved in foreign affairs, letting foreign entanglements, as they referred to it, drive our foreign policy, because it can be dangerous when our laws are based not on our rights and our standards and our understanding, but on others. Washington said in his farewell address, "Against the insidious wiles of foreign influences, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of republican government. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible." This treaty increases our political connections with Canada, Mexico. This is not simply a free trade agreement anymore. It's being expanded, but also with international organizations like the ILO. So I look at this and I see the influence of, and I haven't got proof. It's my understanding based on what I've heard from people I trust and some ideas I've heard floated, but I haven't gotten documentary proof. I want to be clear about that. But this seems to be pushed by Canada. Canada has SOGI laws. Canada is pushing SOGI laws, and they've asked this to be, as I understand it, to be included in this treaty, because if they're going to have the cost of implementing SOGI laws, they want it passed on to their trading partners, meaning they want us to adopt SOGI laws. But we've said repeatedly we don't want to adopt at the federal level SOGI laws. We have them at the local level in many cities. We have them at the state level in many states. But we've said nationally we didn't want a SOGI law because it's not within the federal government's purview. See, to include this language, not only you're not dealing simply with trade, now you're dealing with employment rights, which is not a power delegated to the federal government. But by including it in a treaty and then ratifying it, we are sort of kind of including that as a power for the federal government. It's not technically legal because it's not under the authority of the United States to sign a treaty that includes that. But again, so few people know, so few people listen, that they just look at it and say, oh, okay, it's a treaty, it's been signed, it's been ratified. The fact that Congress has no right to do that, has no power to do that, has no authority to do that, is lost on most people. It's bad enough that the Senate has delegated their treaty negotiating power through the advice part of the advice and consent clause, that they've delegated that to the executive branch. I mean, that's bad enough. That's been going on for decades. That's going to take a while to fix. But if our senators are not going to do their job and at least review the treaty and say, this is not constitutional, we don't have the authority to do this. Well, then again, most senators probably either haven't read or don't understand the Constitution, say, no, we don't have the authority. Nowhere in there does it say that the federal government gets to establish employment laws, because we have federal employment laws. They're illegal, they're unconstitutional, but we have them. And the people with the guns keep telling us we have to follow them. So, maybe if the Senate is going to delegate their treaty negotiating power to the executive, we should find better senators. Maybe we should find senators who will represent their state's interest completely, that will uphold their oath to support the Constitution. Maybe we should be looking for a much better class of senator. Maybe if we spent less time worrying about the bacon they're going to bring home, or fighting over who's going to do what in which budget, and who said what where in a tweet, 2 years ago, and, whether or not a football game was won improperly. Maybe if they spent more time going, what is our actual law? What is our role in this government? Then maybe we would get better treaties. And then having them as the supreme law of the land would not be onerous. It'd be proper. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. That's what I think about it. Tell me what you think. Head down to the website, Constitution Study. Head down to the comment section here. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Do you think this is a type of treaty we should be signing on to? Do you think the fact that it includes SOGI laws should invalidate? We should not sign this treaty until that gets removed. Do you think it's okay for that to happen? Let me know. If you have a question about anything I've said here or anything I've referenced, please let me know. I'm going to point you first to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You can find the article. It's entitled USMCA and the Surprise Inside. You can follow all the links there. You can read all my references. You can debate it. Let me know. As always, like I said, follow me on YouTube, on Facebook. You can also follow the audio podcast on Apple and Google Music. Let me know what you think. I really want this to be a bit more of a discussion. So enjoy the rest of your day. Think about this, comment, let me know. I hope that you are thinking like a constitutional scholar. I hope you are engaging as a constitutional patriot. And I hope to see you the next time on the Constitution Study. Good day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday man.